Hello, this is Stephanie.
And this is Brian.
Welcome to our podcast, The Making and the Remaking of a Codependent Mind. This is actually episode 12 of season 3, and that got us thinking about 12-step programs and AA and CODA.
Yeah, and it kind of feels like the right time to make another attempt at addressing the fact that one of the most common questions that we get from listeners is asking about some kind of resources or steps that I took to get to where I am in this process. And we've kind of briefly answered it here and there in a couple episodes, like a few episodes back, that, we addressed resources a little bit.
And season 2 really was an attempt to describe that process, but
yeah.
It was very involved.
Yeah, there's a lot of episodes and there's a lot of information and it's very stretched out. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of like, okay, let's kind of sum this up a little bit and maybe close out this season with this. With
the idea of what were the steps? Mm-hmm. Can we in fact kind of codify those steps in a more concise way? One reason we have been reluctant to do that, though, is that you yourself didn't find those 12 steps really helpful in any way. The original 12 steps, the 12 steps coming out of AA and that were then translated into CODA language. You didn't find those helpful.
Right. And I kind of, one of the reasons being, I kind of didn't like the one size fits all aspect of it. And so that's why I've been reluctant to, here, do these things and then you'll heal from all this. But for one thing, I think important thing to say right out of the outset here is that I don't think codependency is something that you recover from. It's not like a disease or something. But I feel like that's kind of how CODA and like AA and stuff kind of approach it. Like
that's the model they use, that it's the kind of the disease model.
Yeah, it's kind of this disease and you need someone, God or someone, people or whatever it is, to remove these defects from you so that you're now this functioning person.
Right, this disease has been removed. So we have chosen to understand it and to talk about it as a collection of habitual behavior rather than a disease.
Right. And so there's, and for that reason, then we're not removing anything. We're just rewiring. We're replacing these maladaptive behaviors with different behaviors.
In your story, the recovery really is from the trauma that initiated the codependent behaviors.
Right. I think that's going to be the case for a lot of people. Either it's going to be trauma or it's going to be something similar to that. Mm-hmm. That's what you're recovering from. Whatever the effects are, there's something or a series of things that happened that caused these behaviors to take root. But it's not the behaviors we're trying to heal from. Yeah, we're healing from and trying to discover what it was that caused those behaviors.
And what caused them to be, as you said, maladaptive, which is a way of saying that they no longer served you.
Exactly. That
they're, in fact, were some ways doing the very opposite of what they were designed to do. So we talked about, say, caretaking and people-pleasing being designed to really connect us with other people and help form intimate relationships. They had become maladaptive for you such that they were doing the opposite and making it very difficult for you to be in relationships.
Right, so it's not real intimacy to begin with. I'm just doing this shot in the dark caretaking and people-pleasing to everyone, and then certain people that kind of prey on that behavior, this whole narcissist codependent combo being like the most, the one that was most prevalent for me. Then I'm getting stuck with these people,
right? And
then keeping the right people at arm's length, kind of, because I'm not really having intimate relationships with them.
So that was one of your challenges with the CODA framework.
Yeah.
But in terms of like 12 steps programs in particular, what are a few of your issues with the 12 steps as they're written?
One of the things that really rubbed me the wrong way when I was going to AA meetings was that a lot of these meetings started with this reading from the book. There's what's called the Big Book, which is the book that was written by these people back when the program started. Yeah, it was just a small group of people. It started obviously with one guy and one doctor, but then they formed a very small group of people. Kind of like the first AA meeting, basically. And then they wrote this book around that. And there's this one quote that was read in almost every meeting that I was like, that seems really condescending and kind of counterproductive, the way this is worded. So here's exactly how it's written. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. So it's like, all right, this is super simple. All you have to do is do these steps exactly like this, and you'll recover.
Yeah,
if you don't, you failed.
That's pretty rough. I mean, it's really, you can see kind of shame triggers in there.
Yeah, right.
Like you're shaming people if they fail. And in terms of kind of the research and scholarship, AA does not work for the majority of people that go to. It certainly works for some people, but for the vast majority, it does not. And I don't think it's because they're all constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves.
Right. Well, see, and I think, and this is something I remember from the program too, for the people that it worked for, and I'll put air quotes on work, was that they didn't really understand why it worked. Mm-hmm. And it's fine that it did work for them. That's great that they kept going back to it. It kept working. They kept helping other people. As a whole, that's great that it worked for some people. But I think it's important to know why. Why is it working? What exactly are you helping here?
Right. So we have a whole swath of people that it doesn't work for, and then they're getting shamed for the fact that they failed. And then we have people who it does work for, but even if it works for them, kind of what you're saying, it doesn't mean that it's the 12 steps that were the magical formula. Yeah. It could certainly have just been that the support that they get from regularly interacting with other people who are struggling. Yeah. It could have been, they formed a strong relationship with one or two people or their sponsor, and they were able to help work through other issues in their life.
One of the things I remember liking about it was that, for a while I was going like every day and stuff like that. And so it's like, oh, yay. Like I kind of got excited about it. Like, oh, tonight I'm going to go and talk to people that have similar problems as me.
Rather than sitting alone in your apartment, feeling sad, depressed, and wanting to drink because you have nothing else to do. Sort of thing.
So I think that's what worked for me. And I feel like it would be similar with CODA type program. You're going and you're around all these people that have similar issues and some compassion for each other for it.
Right. And I'm not aware of any scholarship or research that's been done on the 12 steps themselves. So people have studied the efficacy of the AA program, but I don't know if there's been any studying. If you follow these people who follow these 12 steps to the letter, I don't even know how you do that research versus people who don't. So really, it's kind of unknown what contribution, if any, the 12 steps themselves have to the AA program.
Yeah, well, and one of the things being that it's not addressing the root cause of these things, like we said. So it's like, okay, why are you an alcoholic? Are you interested in that? Or are you just interested in stopping drinking? Like, that's fine if that's all you care about, but why do you think you were abusing alcohol? Or codependency, where do you think these behaviors came from?
The steps seem to be even more challenging when you transpose them onto the CODA framework.
Right, exactly.
And those in particular you don't like.
Let's read those steps right now just so that people have an idea in their head of what these are.
And they're pretty much almost identical to the AA steps.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, there's just a couple of words changed here and there, but it's the same exact steps. So 1, we admitted we were powerless over others, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand God. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked God to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. And 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to other codependents and to practice these principles in all of our affairs.
So we'll put aside the God piece, which a lot of people struggle with and which you didn't connect with either. But I mean, I think there's ways to deal with that.
There's ways around that, yeah.
There's certainly some good stuff in there. The impulse towards self-knowledge and self-awareness.
Right. Yeah. Taking an inventory, making amends with people.
Admitting that there are issues and problems in your life that need to be dealt with. As you say, making amends, trying to reconnect with people that have been harmed. But I think the first one, unfortunately, is very problematic, particularly for codependency.
For codependency, right. So I think the way these were
Which,
worded...
why you read that one again, because it's really...
Yeah, right. So that one is, we admitted we were powerless over others, that our lives had become unmanageable. Here's the big problem, is that, first of all, the way these are worded with we is a problem for me, because I've come to find powerless language. That's codependent language, right? Saying we. So trying to have this program where I'm saying we, I'm giving up my power right there in the wording of these steps.
And also your kind of accountability.
Yeah. So there's that, but then also the fact that I get that with AA, it's like I'm powerless over alcohol. I can't control myself when I'm drinking, so I need to stop or whatever. But with codependency, at the core, it's powerlessness, right? So fine, admitting you're powerless, and then what? The next step is to turn that power over?
Yes.
Well, you've already done that.
Yeah, I mean, you did that repeatedly through your life.
Yeah.
Almost in every relationship, you turned your power over to the other person.
Yeah. It was a habitual thing. Like, I just assumed I had no power.
Which is not to say that when that happened, you didn't try to find ways to assert some control over your environment and yourself. And I think this is, some people end up talking about codependence if they're controlling and they're trying to control people. I think that's a little off the mark. That kind of, it's not like the narcissistic controlling where, narcissists are trying to control people in order to extract resources from them. I think when you're talking about people with codependent behaviors, they're in a situation that is very childlike.
Yeah.
Where as you say, they don't feel they have, everyone else feels more powerful. They don't feel they have power. And so they're controlling the way that children can kind of be controlling, right? They're trying to approach people who are more powerful than they are and get protected by them, or have them be pleased with them so that they'll be safe.
Right.
Which is again different than, I'm going to manipulate someone into, supporting me financially or...
Yeah. I mean, like you can make that argument that it's controlling somehow, but that's really just kind of semantics. Like, it's who it's harming is the codependent person mostly. Because
they're assuming they have no power. So anything that they get in terms of protection or self-esteem or love has to come from other people because they themselves are powerless.
Yeah, and unfortunately for a codependent person that habitually people pleases everyone, that's going to be some abusive person often.
So this first step, admit that I'm powerless, did nothing for you.
No, right.
It had made no sense to you because you did not feel like a powerful person in the world that was...
Right, so I needed really the opposite.
And, the question might be asked, okay, so we don't like the steps and we have a problem with this idea of everyone following the same steps and it all working for them. Why are we doing this episode?
Yeah.
But another thing it says in the big book, as it introduced the steps, it says, here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. But if you just look at that first part, here are the steps we took, that can be useful. I do think it can be useful to hear from others the steps they took in trying to change their behavior and change their lives.
And so, like we said, we're distilling this into one episode, actually two, because this is going to take a little while to go through these. We did 12, and we want to talk about
You did 12.
Yeah, well, we worked on them together.
I commented on them.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, well, and it was a great exercise writing these steps out for me, too, because, yes, we did spend season 2 and really a lot of the whole podcast really talking about the things I did, but to try to distill them down into this list was really, I found it to be a great exercise.
So instead of here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery.
So what we're doing here is we're rewriting it to here are the steps I took, which may offer some inspiration or suggestions as you design your own path to recovery.
And that might be a good exercise for many people to design their own path of recovery by writing their own 12-step.
And not necessarily like the point isn't like, oh, write these down and do these exactly like this in this order or something.
So we're just hoping that these serve not as a program, but as you said, as inspiration for other people's healing path.
And so rather than list all the steps off.
Well, we'll put them in the show notes.
We'll put them in the show notes.
We'll just go through them one by one right now.
But instead we'll go through them one by one and talk about them as we go through them. So let's go ahead and do it.
Number one.
Number one, I admitted that I was powerful, that my life could be manageable. So this is basically almost the same kind of step, but entirely reversed. Rather than I admitted I was powerless, I admitted I was powerful.
Which may seem odd to many people, especially who don't struggle with codependency. But it was absolutely the case for you. And this took a while for us, for both of us, to realize what was going on. But through the early part of our relationship, there were plenty of examples of language that you used and behaviors that you took that in retrospect, as I started to understand this dynamic and this phenomena, were examples of this lack of agency, that you did not see yourself as a powerful agent in the world.
I didn't feel it, and I didn't believe it.
So you had, for instance, difficulty explaining the relationships and the friendship that you ended up in because they actually weren't choices. You didn't actually choose to be in them. So you often kind of couldn't explain what you were doing there. Right.
It was always this kind of post hoc rationalization. Everything, like pretty much everything in my life was a post hoc rationalization.
So one example would be of the post hoc rationalization is when you talked about the beginning of your relationship with R. Initially, the story you told about that was that you were dating a few people and that R was the one that seemed to be most your type. She was kind of exciting and confident, and you were drawn to those type of people. And she had tattoos and stuff like that. But then later, as you went through this process and started to look honestly at the various relationships in your life, you realized that wasn't it at all.
No. Yeah, it wasn't. No. She just grabbed my attention and my time in the most forceful way compared to the other people that I was associating with.
Yeah, I mean, you had one conversation with her, you were in a relationship. It wasn't like you ever decided I guess it's not like you were dating her and other people at the same time. Like the first date you went on with her, you were essentially not allowed to see anyone else.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it was a work situation, so I did talk to her a few times before that initiated. But once it initiated, that's this super fast. Within a week, we're in a relationship, full on. And I was going out on a few dates with other people, which I thought were great people. And
before you went on that date with her,
before that date with her, and then never spoke to any of them ever again.
So it's not
this is the one here.
Yeah. So this, you told me the story. It was I was dating many people, and you essentially chose that. She chose you,
right?
And then that was it.
Exactly, right.
And you also had difficulty taking accountability too. I mean, you had difficulty taking action without other people telling you that it was okay to act.
Yeah, right. I didn't trust my own judgment, more or less.
Absolutely, right. And you didn't feel you almost seemed to have the right to do things. Yeah. So one concrete example of that would be we've mentioned when we met, you were still in the process of extracting yourself from the relationship with Jay. As anyone who knows who's tried to extract themselves from a narcissist, that is a very long drawn out process because they are going to keep you around in whatever capacity they can for as long as they can to get whatever resources they think are still available for you.
Right.
For instance, that happened with R. Even when R supposedly ended the marriage, she was still...
She wanted the exact same relationship, but just without the pressure of being married.
Yeah, well, in fact, you still continued to live with her and support her financially for months and months.
Yeah, and emotionally and all that.
And emotionally...
No, she was still abusing me. And
So I got to see a lot of the way that you were trying to handle that relationship. And there was one instance that you had actually finally officially been divorced, papers filed, everything over. You had given her the thousands and thousands of dollars in which she had extracted from you, but she was still insisting that you had to do this other stuff from her.
Yeah.
You had to send her tax records. Of course, you did all the taxes and kept all the records.
Right.
So, but you're officially divorced. She had been I had witnessed you now being abused for months. You had, at that point, even acknowledged that she was a terrible person. And maybe we even started using the abuse language, but you still could not tell her no.
Yeah, right.
And in fact, you went to the paralegal that you had used to do the divorce and essentially kind of asked her if it was okay if you didn't send these tax records to Jay.
Yeah.
You needed some powerful or authoritative figure to give you permission.
Yeah, even though it wasn't this woman's job at all.
No, and in fact, that's kind of what she said. She's like,
yeah,
I don't know,
do whatever you want, right?
my part is done. Like you're divorced.
Well, and also, I would defer to others, or either defer to others, or at least feel as though I had to run everything by others, or I would enlist others too. So I enlisted you all the time. Help make me feel better about this situation. Like, am I doing the right thing here? You know, like, is it okay that I ignore her texts or
right.
like, you know, whatever?
Right. Yeah. And a lot of this behavior seemed odd to me because here you are, an adult male, intelligent, professionally successful, attractive, charming, sexy, all of these things that I found you to be. So it didn't occur to me that you would feel powerless. I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I remember when you had that interaction with the paralegal, I was like, why are you asking this person? If you don't want to give Jay the tax records, don't give her the tax records. Right. Why do you need someone to tell you you're allowed or not allowed?
Well, and of course, I didn't know any of this either.
No, you didn't know this. So admitting that you had power was very difficult for you.
Right. Yeah. It was not an easy step. So kind of like, I mean, if you go back to the original programs like AA and stuff, that's not an easy step for someone trying to quit drinking either, to admit that I can't do this anymore or whatever. And so that's what I'm doing here, though. I'm admitting that I do have power, that I can find that power and I can access that power.
And I think, part of the challenge with admitting that was shame.
Yes, right.
So, I mean, you could get out of the shame of, say, being in the relationship with Jay and the way that she treated you if you were convinced that you had no other choice. But say when people would ask you, when you complain about her to people and they would ask you, why are you with this person? That would cause shame. The idea that you had a choice and that you were choosing to be there was too shameful.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of another word I used a lot in the earlier days was wish. I wish this.
Oh, right. Yes, absolutely. There was like a lot of that. Like, I wish this could happen. I wish that could happen. Or I wish she wouldn't do that. Or I wish I didn't have to do this. And it's like, well, you don't have to do this. Or you don't have to accept that treatment.
Yeah.
That's true. I forgot about that.
So, that's kind of a good example of powerless language also. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was easier for you to say, well, I wish this could happen. But then if you recognize that you had the power to make it happen, you had to deal with the shame and the fear of trying to make it happen.
Right. And that would happen so quickly in my mind that, I would rest at this I wish place and just kind of stay there.
And we just had this episode on anger and resentment. That's where the resentment comes in for people.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, I wish this person would treat me better. Well, you have some power to make that happen.
Boundaries or leaving.
Boundaries or leaving. Yeah. I wish I had a better job. Well, you probably have some power to make that happen rather than just staying in the situation and being resentful. Right. Yeah. So that was a big one. And that's still ongoing.
Yeah, right.
So number two
is I came to believe that human interpersonal relationships are a core feature of an enriching life experience and that my habitual codependent behaviors were holding me back from having that experience.
And I think you mentioned that you always believed that relationships were important.
Yeah, except that I downplayed that knowledge, so much because I isolated so much and I felt like I deserved to be isolated kind of in a way. I had to take whatever came along. But we talked about that friendship that I had for years that I considered to be pretty good, other than the kind of disordered, both of us being disordered. But that gave me a good example and a thing to pull from as far as like, yes, I do like intimacy in my life. I do like having this kind of communication and this kind of respect and all of that.
And you would talk about how you would think about that friendship when you were in the relationship with R and J and not understand why it couldn't be the same way.
Especially near the beginning of R, because I started to, it just really chiseled away and I was worse than ever eventually. And I think by the time I got to J, like I was already kind of obliterated.
Right. But you did mention to me, so this is even post
Yeah, it's still there. It's like, it's not like I erased my entire history or anything. Yeah.
So you would wonder that, why can't I have the kind of respectful communication that I had with my friend, with my romantic partners? But you would wonder in a way that would take yourself and your own behaviors out of the equation.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, you wouldn't wonder that in like, what am I doing or, or maybe these are the wrong relationships, right? Again, it was like just sent out into the universe. You were powerless. Like these are the relationships that you were given.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly how it
And
felt.
so, I mean, there's maybe some resentment to the universe or to R&J that it was not as respectful or connected or intimate as your friendship, but you didn't do that second part of the second step, which is recognizing that it was your own habitual codependent behaviors that were holding you back from the experience. It wasn't the universe doing you in.
Yeah. So part of my habitual powerlessness and then the resentment that follows was just keeping me stuck. And then the codependent behaviors were what I did to keep propelling myself and just keep myself stuck in these situations.
And I remember early on you mentioning how both R and J quit their jobs within essentially a couple months or a few months of you getting together. And you brought it up again as if this is like a terribly unlucky thing. Like, why does this keep happening to me? And I asked that question back to you. I was kind of like, if it happened twice in a row, like maybe it has something to do with you. And you're like, and I think you kind of paused for maybe 5 seconds or not even maybe a second. And then you dismiss that. Like, oh no, I didn't, there's nothing I did. It was just, it was just bad luck or they're bad people or something like that,
right.
Which of course, like, obviously that's not just bad luck.
Yeah.
Clearly
right.
It was the codependent behaviors in both of your own codependent behaviors in both of those, the enabling behaviors, the compliant behaviors, the trying to pacify them by any means.
Yeah. And there, of course, there is an element of bad luck in there, but that's not what is important.
Yes, absolutely. And then I'm saying you deserved that because of the codependent behaviors, but your codependent behaviors were making a contribution to preventing you from having the relationships that you wanted in your life.
And those behaviors were the thing that I could and should have had control over and some power over. Not them, those people. Right. But my reaction to those people.
Yeah, so you were not going to control and change them.
No.
You had to control and change yourself.
Yeah.
So number 3.
Number 3 is made a decision to listen to what my emotions are telling me and understand the ways in which I had been avoiding or burying those emotions. So this is also a thing that I carried along throughout this entire period, all the way back to the friendship with G, was muting my emotions, never learning what they were for. This whole good and bad emotion thing that we talked about in the last episode. Just, I don't like that. I need to avoid that. Like we've said before, though, these go back to those millennia, that we've developed these emotions to give us signals. And if we don't listen to those signals, then we're only half a person, kind of. We're not. Those predate our language and stuff.
Right.
So they're super important, and it's not a huge surprise that if we're not listening to them and we're avoiding them and burying them, that we would be just dysfunctional.
But a lot of them are very powerful. We talked about that in terms of anger.
Yeah.
But not just anger. I mean, obviously shame is powerful and the positive ones can be powerful as well. So a lot of them can be very scary. Scary to feel, scary to sit with. So that was a really important part of this process for you.
Yeah, right. I just had to really spend the time figuring out what exactly I was feeling to begin before I can even really do a lot of this stuff.
So number 3 was really you making the commitment to start really looking into your emotions. And part of that, number 4.
And then number 4 is I made a searching and fearless inventory of all the relationships in my life, past and present, what effect those people's behaviors had on me, and the effects that my behaviors had on those people. And this was
kind of literally a step that you took.
It is, absolutely.
One of the early ones. And it was really when you started what we could call the journaling process. You went back all the way through your life, relationship with G, the relationship with R and J, and really tried to take an inventory, not just of what they did to you.
Yeah, which was important. I didn't really do that either.
But also actions that you took that both harmed yourself and harmed others.
Yeah, and harmed others. And in the case of, if it was with an abusive person, how did those behaviors get me stuck and keep me stuck with those people? But also, how did these behaviors affect the other people in my life that were not in that abusive relationship themselves, but almost got abused through me?
So if I'm remembering, for a while, you had a kind of organized way of looking at periods in your life. You would take an episode or a period and you would apply.
Or actually even a specific incident. It was easier for me to do it that way. Kind of like, I remember this one thing that happened. Now let me pick it apart.
And you would apply these kind of 3 perspectives to it.
Mm-hmm. So the first one being, what did this other person do and how did it affect me? Was it abuse?
Yeah.
Was it not abuse? What was happening as far as what the other person was doing? And be honest about that. If I was a victim, that's fine to say that.
And have compassion for yourself and for that victimhood.
Yeah. And then the second piece, and by the way, all three of these pieces had to be done simultaneously, more or less. I mean, like at first I actually wrote out 3 different pieces, literally, when I was journaling about this stuff. But the second piece being, what were my behaviors in this situation? What did I do? Just be honest about it. I had to rewrite stories here. So, because there was a lot of the stuff that I already buried and rewrote to avoid the shame of the situation. So I had to go back and place myself there and go, okay, I need to really remember what it was I did here. So,
right, so don't stay in victimhood. Move on and say, also, you were doing things that were contributing to this situation, either contributing to your own victimhood or potentially harming others as well.
Yeah. And then the third piece was basically empathy. So if there was someone, like say you involved in a situation, try to put myself in your shoes and think about how this may have made you feel.
Right.
When this was happening.
Yeah. So, or you think about, say, me or these people say that you were complaining about Jay too. Like, how did it feel for people who cared about you, friends and family, to hear about this kind of dysfunctional relationship repeatedly from you?
Yeah. And then not take their advice.
And then you would not take their advice, and then you'd be dismissive of their concerns. And they would just have to be witnessing this over and over again.
Yeah.
I think those pieces are really good, having all of those components in mind. Because early on, when we would talk about your past, you would kind of flip-flop between either complete victimhood, right?
Yeah.
Jay made me do it, or Art made me do it. You know, like, I'm not implicated in this. Or you would shame spiral.
Yeah.
It was just like, you were a terrible person. There was no escaping that fact. There was no justification or reason why you did what you did. It was just because you're a terrible person. So you had to kind of find that middle ground.
Yeah. It's okay for it to be elements of both, obviously. You know? I was basically just kind of admitting either that I was completely powerless. Well, both are basically saying I'm powerless.
Yes, absolutely.
Really,
Yeah.
And there's nothing I can do. Either I was completely abused or I'm just terrible, awful. There's nothing I can do about it either.
Right.
Way,
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. So this was another pathway to feeling your own sense of personal power, which was both recognizing the way in which you were harmed and taking accountability for the way that other people were harmed by your behavior. And that's ongoing.
Right. That's ongoing. That's always ongoing. And all this stuff gets easier, of course. It has gotten easier for me over time. You know, it doesn't, like I said at the beginning, I actually would write out the 3 pieces. But eventually I was just like, kind of, it became incorporated. It just became easier to just
keep all those pieces in mind. The way in which you were harmed, the way in which your own behaviors contributed to the situation, and then the way which other people were harmed.
Yeah, so it was almost like I was forcing myself to incorporate all that, find that middle ground. And then now I just kind of move more from the middle ground habitually.
And then the last one I think we have time for is number 5.
Number 5 then was I admitted to another human being that I value and trust the exact nature of those behaviors and relationships to the best of my ability. So it wasn't enough just for me to just journal this stuff, because we've said this several times now. Other people are vital to any sort of healing, I think, and change and reprogramming. I couldn't just do this on my own, because I'm going to use my brain to solve a problem that's in my brain. You know, that's a tall order.
And like these are kind of in order, but not exact, right? No. So it's not like you wait to step 5 in order to talk to other people. Like that should happen off the top. Yeah. That needs to happen right from the beginning. But you stayed in dialogue all the way through, say, the journaling process. Yeah. As a way to check yourself that you weren't being honest, and also to get support and further insight, all of those things that you're saying. So important to have at least one other person. Could be a therapist, could be someone you met in CODA, right. Could be a friend, could be a family member.
Someone that just has the enough compassion and empathy for you, but also doesn't go too easy really on you either, is honest. This person has to somehow be capable themselves of intimacy in some way. But yeah, it could be a therapist, it could be a professional person that's trained to do that.
Absolutely.
But otherwise, people also, just people in your life. Relationships.
I think it's important to take this step seriously and to take responsibility for this step, because neither of us are saying that it's easy to find a person or people like that.
Right.
Even a therapist, it can be hard to find a good therapist. But it is really important part, I think, of this process that you put yourself in dialogue with a trustworthy person.
Yeah. I think if you feel as though you haven't found that, keep trying.
Exactly.
You know, I mean,
exactly.
When I think back to those earlier days, for one thing, it got me on the road to real intimacy, right? So we've said this before, but in the earlier days, you started all our conversations about intimacy, and this gave me an in to make me get a little more comfortable and build a little momentum and confidence that I could start a conversation, an intimate conversation. And then there was a lot of times when I'd say I'd journal about something and I'd bring it to you at the end of the day, and you had a different opinion. You're like, actually, that's not the way I see it. And then we have a conversation about it. And then I could go back the next day and rethink it. Mm-hmm. You know, if it were just me writing this thing out and that's it, I've written the story now, you know, but bring in another person. Now you're at least twice as likely to get to the real truth, I think.
So I think that's the last one we have time for today. Mm-hmm. We will put all of them in this week's show notes. Then we'll go through steps 6 through 12 in the next episode.
As always, we love to hear from you. You can find us on Instagram or Facebook, Codependent Mind, or send us an email at codependentmind@gmail.com.
And we'll hope that you'll join us in a couple of weeks.